Where did you get that from? All right. I'm going to go ahead and read these stipulations in. Stipulated order concerning facts pertaining to DNA evidence. The state and the defense, in a mutual effort to reduce the scope and quantity of certain testimony otherwise necessary at any future pretrial immunity, stand your ground hearing and/or any trial, stipulate and agree to certain facts. The state and the defense stipulate to the following facts. The iPhone belonging to Chad Olson, which was seized by law enforcement on January 13, 2014 from inside Theater Number 10, Cobb Theater at the Grove, 6333 Wesley Grove Boulevard, Wesley Chapel, Florida, was tested by Mary Pacheco of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Biology Unit for the presence of DNA material. The testimony of Mary Pacheco would establish the following results. 1. The DNA profile obtained from the iPhone black case, Exhibit 8P-13 black case, demonstrated the presence of a mixture of at least 3 individuals. Due to the complexity of the mixture obtained from the iPhone black case, Exhibit 8P-13 case, this data was not interpretable. 2. Due to the limited nature of the DNA results obtained from the iPhone's black case screen, Exhibit AP-13 screen, this data is insufficient for inclusion purposes, but may be suitable for exclusion. 3. Due to the limited nature of the results obtained, Chad Olson, Exhibit SM-15, can be neither included nor excluded as a contributor to the iPhone's black case screen, Exhibit AP-13 screen. 4. Curtis Reeves, Exhibit AP-13 screen, is excluded as a source of the limited DNA results obtained from the iPhone's black case screen, Exhibit AP-13 screen. The state and the defense further agree that the stipulated order will remain in full force and effect for all hearings and trials of this case. The court, having reviewed the file and pleadings and being fully advised in the premises, finds that good cause exists to approve the stipulated order. As agreed upon by the parties, the stipulated order will remain in full force and effect for all hearings and trials of the case. This has been signed by Mr. Escobar, Mr. Martin, Mr. Reeves, and myself. All right. The next one is stipulated order regarding facts pertaining to Chad Olson's use of his cellular phone on January 13th between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. Counsel for the respective parties herein hereby stipulate and agree to the following. on January 13, 2014, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. There were no communications of any kind made or sent by Chad Olson from his iPhone 5SNDNPK2UU5DTTP, that's the serial number, recovered from Theater 10, Cobb Theater at the Grove, 633 Wesley Grove Boulevard, Wesley Chapel, Florida, between 1 p.m. and 1:30 on January 13, 2014. Chad Olson, 1, downloaded images and other content associated with the viewing of Facebook content and or content linked to Facebook, including but not limited to profootballmock.com. Number 2, received 1 missed call, phone call at 1:23 from Tony Reeves, and number 3 said 1 missed phone call went to voicemail at 1:24. Aside from these 3 described events, from 1 o'clock p.m. to 1:30 p.m. on January 13, 2014, there were no other communications of any kind received by Chad Olson on his iPhone 5 with the aforementioned serial number, recovered from Theater number 10, Cobb Theater at the Grove, Wesley Grove Boulevard, Wesley Chapel, Florida. The court, having reviewed the file and pleadings and being fully advised in the premises, finds that good cause exists to approve this stipulated order regarding facts pertaining to Chad Olson's use of his cellular phone on January 13, 2014, between 1 p.m. and 1:30. And as agreed upon by the parties, the stipulated order will remain in full force and effect for all hearings and trials of this case. That was done and ordered by myself February 17th and signed by Mr. Escobar and Mr. Martin and Mr. Reeves as well. All right. Any other matters before we begin? All right, Mr. Escobar, you ready to start?
May it please the court, Mr. Martin, Mr. Garcia, Mrs. Summer. Perception. We told this court early on the presentation of our case, the word perception would have a very vital and important impact in this case. This case is all about perception. The influenced perception that mid-afternoon of a 71-year-old, highly decorated and highly trained police captain, Curtis Reeves. The influenced perception of witnesses, those witnesses and officers that visited the Cobb Theater on January the 13th of 2014, that mid-afternoon. Their influences, however, were quite different. Unfortunately, that mid-afternoon, this Pasco Theater shooting incident quickly unraveled on its own. Was it perhaps the sheer size of this incident? Was it perhaps the need to make some quick decisions because the media was there with helicopters and cameras? Was it perhaps the lack of law enforcement experience in dealing with this very unique self-defense case? Was it perhaps the sheer emotion of a theater shooting, a place we all share for some peace and solitude, to enjoy the experience of a movie? How did this investigation begin? How did this investigation end? Did it end too soon with the arrest of Curtis Reeves? Was there a rush to judgment? The court recalls it took merely a couple of hours for Detective Proctor, without first even visiting the scene, without first even attempting to view a video, and merely talking to 3 witnesses besides Mr. Reeves. This investigation began on January the 13th of 2014. But we need to first determine, who is Curtis J. Reeves? Curtis, the evidence shows, is one of the most decorated and accomplished police captains in the history of the Tampa Police Department. A simple man who, upon graduating from high school, decided he wanted to serve his country by enlisting in the United States Navy. A means to serve his country and a means to further his education. Upon completion of that service with the Navy, he obtained a job, simple job, an important job, as a lineman with General Telephone. And at the age of 24, he was hired by the Tampa Police Department to serve our community as a law enforcement officer. He excelled at the academy, vice president of his class. He was given the best all-around recruit for his class. An identical achievement that his son, who is present in that second row, received as well. Matthew Reeves. Curtis quickly rose through the ranks at the Tampa Police Department. He started off as a patrol officer for a year and a half. What a shock to him of what happens day in and day out in our very community. This young, impressionable 24-year-old, for the first time, understanding the horrific things that we see daily in our community. That domestic violence victim who is brutally beaten by the fist of their spouse. That elderly neighbor while walking home from a local convenience store that is seriously battered and robbed. That senseless barroom brawl that leaves a young college student with broken orbital bones and a life of disabilities. Those are the experiences, just a few, of patrolmen in our community enforcing the laws. You gain an appreciation for danger. You gain a respect for how to deal with dangerous situations. Curtis was quickly promoted to the Selective Enforcement Unit. If the court recalls, this unit was a special unit. No longer was this unit really investigating crimes that had already taken place. But now this Selective Enforcement Unit was primed to intercede before the crime was completed. It was the stakeouts, the robberies, exposing this unit to dangerous, unpredictable, and violent crimes in progress. You learn the skills to anticipate danger, to understand escalating patterns of violence, to act responsibly for the protection of this community and for yourself. Curtis in that unit further enhanced the people that he served by starting the first fugitive arrest division for the Tampa Police Department. That fugitive division still stands today as an important function of law enforcement. Curtis married Vivian Yarborough in 1967. Now married for 50 years. 50 years of stability, love, appreciation, and care. They both together raised two wonderful children. Curtis, raising and assisting his wife in raising those children, unselfishly serving his community, and fulfilling one of his lifelong dreams, graduating magna cum laude while working full-time as a police officer, and raising those children from the University of Tampa. Curtis was quickly promoted to homicide, if you recall, 3.5 years merely being in the force. He's promoted to one of the most appreciated and significant units within that department. He's learning from his mentors, he's learning from his sergeants, and he too becomes a sergeant shortly thereafter. As a sergeant, he inspired the creation, development, and implementation of Tampa's first tactical response team, one of a few of its kind throughout the country. A team that is called upon at the most dangerous moments in our society. A team that has no room for mistakes. Could cost you your life. And as he's done his entire career, Curtis immersed himself to educate himself on officer survival and tactical procedures, not only for his benefit, but so he could train those that depended upon him for their survival, for their assurance that that night they would come home. He commanded that squad for 15 years, never having to fire his own weapon and shoot a suspect. Never having to fire his own weapon in 27 years of law enforcement to shoot a suspect. In 1988, Curtis was hit with cancer, which eventually accelerated his eventual retirement from the police department. He retired in 1993. Old doors closed, new doors open. Curtis Reeves enters now the corporate world. No longer is Curtis now enforcing the criminal laws of the state of Florida. But he is given the ultimate responsibility of keeping our families safe in one of the most cherished amusement parks in our area, where thousands of moms and dads and children congregate to enjoy their mornings and afternoons in peace and tranquility. He had to learn that in the corporate world, now it's all about the customer. That customer experience. And as he did with his law enforcement career, he immersed himself in education and training to be the best director of security that he could possibly be. And not for Curtis Reeves, but for those he was serving. "12 years not enforcing the criminal laws of the state of Florida. 12 years helping Busch Entertainment attain the goals they had, and not just of the local Busch Gardens, but as well coordinating the improvements that were being made at Busch with all of the theme parks that were owned at that time by the Busch corporate world. After 12 years, old age and the rigors of his profession led to his permanent retirement in 2005. Your Honor, that was Curtis Reeves in his earlier years. But that was Curtis Reeves with an incredible foundation of a human being and of the ultimate professional. The ultimate family. The ultimate father. The ultimate parishioner. Who is Curtis Reeves today? Jennifer Shaw, his lovely daughter, who sits here in the second row. Had to recognize the slow deterioration of her father as he grew older. Jennifer knew her dad as a loving, dedicated, physically fit, a man who could do just practically anything. He used to rappel off of buildings on ropes. He used to rappel off ropes off helicopters. A man in his time that had trained incredibly well. But more importantly, a dedicated and loving father. Now, some of the simple things that we take for granted were difficult. Some of the simple things that we take for granted in life as we get older become difficult. All of us. All of us. Not just Curtis Reeves. Opening a jar of pickles. Separating kayak paddles. Playing with his granddaughter on the floor only to realize that then he can't get up by himself and he needs the assistance of someone to help him get up. Those are just some of the difficult and painful realities of aging. Curtis and Jennifer grew to accept those realities. Matt Reeves, likewise, recognized that deterioration. From a strong and talented, avid sportsman, a hunter, to a father merely trying to maintain some semblance of the sport. From mountain biking, long range to long range biking, period, to now exercising on a stationary bike. Watching his father over the many years, enjoying his woodworking, his leather craftsmanship, now merely a painful reminder of that aging process. And who better to recognize these changes with age than Vivian Reeves? This loving wife of 50 years who wakes up every morning with him, who goes to bed every night at his side. These noticeable changes, Your Honor, come with aging. Those are the things we fear. These noticeable changes that Vivian herself realizes of herself. Growing old together can be wonderful. Growing old together can be painful. The defense brought to you a nationally recognized forensic radiologist, Dr. Michael Foley. Why did we do that? Forensic verification. Forensic verification of what his son, his wife, and his daughter, and Curtis himself knew all along. Forensic images that we all trust. The X-ray, the MRI, and Dr. Foley meticulously went through every bone of his body to show you those changes that will come to all of us. And we ask ourselves why. Dr. Foley told you the human body was not built for this long wear and tear. Remember when he explained to you the cushions that we have between our joints. Those cushions there are supposed to allow us to move our fingers, to move our knees, to move our arms freely. But when that padding begins to wear away, when that cushion begins to deteriorate, it then becomes bone on bone. And it just doesn't happen to law enforcement officers. It happens to everyone. Everyone, sooner or later, will have these changes. And these changes are painful. These changes are limiting. These changes change our lives. There wasn't a segment of Curtis's body that was not affected by these degenerative changes that we all will experience. These reminders when we wake up every morning and our fingers are stiff. These reminders when we sit down and realize that by getting up, you're going to have some pain in your back. These reminders that we just can't move like we used to. Unrefuted testimony. Totally unrefuted testimony. In this case. Painful reminders of the limitations we all will face in our golden years, our most precious period in life. Painful reminders of the vulnerability that came less than a year after this very incident, when Curtis, walking with his granddaughter, fell and broke his hip and required hip replacement. To most of us that are much younger, a simple fall in a back patio results in a simple bruise. But to 71-year-old Curtis Reeves, a simple fall results in a broken hip and the potential complications that come with that. That's not some forensic issue that we brought to the table. That happened naturally, less than a year from this very same incident. Less than 1 year. Dr. Donna Cohen, likewise nationally acclaimed in the studies of aging and education. And she had something I think that was quite powerful. The aged of today are the children of yesterday. The aged of today are the children of yesterday. And the children of yesterday are the caregivers, of today. Yes, children now caring for their parents, as parents cared for them. It's the realities of aging, and a subject that none of us want to discuss, none of us want to think about. The realities are dreadful, but inevitable. She outlined for us the biopsychosocial aspects of the aging process itself, the realities of our own vulnerabilities as we age, the perception of our own frailties, loss of muscle mass. As someone that grows older, you see it every day. As you wake up in the morning and you look at the mirror, the loss of muscle mass is something you see every day. That constant reminder that no, you can't do the things you used to. The loss of balance, the loss of strength, the loss of dexterity, and the loss of endurance. These are all obstacles that we will face at some time. But Your Honor, Curtis Reeves is not disabled. Curtis Reeves, as he sits here, he's not disabled. He's not crippled. He's not in a wheelchair. He doesn't have any significant disabilities. He's merely old. And with that age comes that reality that we're frail, that we can't do the things we once were able to do, and that our great state of Florida has recognized by the very laws that they have enacted on crimes against the elderly. Our great state makes it a felony for a simple battery on someone 65 years of age and older. Our great state makes it a felony for a simple misdemeanor battery on someone 65 years of age and older. It is a statewide recognition that older people have these vulnerabilities. A simple bruise may take weeks to heal. A simple cut is difficult to stop bleeding. And a simple fall results in a fractured hip and possibly death by its complications. Curtis Reeves has worked very hard to maintain some sense of physical abilities in order to enjoy the simpler but important things in life. Today, Curtis is no longer physically fit to achieve. Today, Curtis is physically fit to maintain and to slow the progression of aging. The facts in the investigation. The scene. Matinee movie, January 13th, 2014. Vivian and Curtis were there to enjoy a matinee afternoon movie with their son Matthew. Curtis, that retired law enforcement officer and the holder of a carry and concealed permit for a firearm, also a holder of a federal law enforcement officer safety act firearms permit, went to the cop theater with a small pistol, I think the court was able to see it, in his pocket, as he does most of his life. And he told you that he was well aware that that federal statute's legislative intent, the statutory sessions, encourage retired law enforcement to be armed so that they too can assist in tragedies that still happen throughout our country. You didn't see Curtis Reeves that day with a .45 semi-automatic in his pocket. The only purpose of that small gun was for the protection of himself and his family. Detective Aaron Smith told you, look, it's not unusual for a retired police officer to be armed all the time. You know why? Because it's not. Curtis went to the Cobb Theater that day to enjoy the experience of a movie with his wife and son. They bought their tickets, they went inside, selected their seats. And the public announcement to turn their cell phones off is shown. A public announcement that all of us in our society recognize. A public announcement that should be respected for the common courtesy of others in that theater. Your Honor read the statement. There was no texting my daughter, who at the time was 2 or 3. We have to ask ourselves, why at that very moment is Mr. Olson saying to everyone in that theater, I'm texting my daughter, when that was not true? We know what was happening that day in that theater. Facebook took precedence over everything. The previews began to play, and Curtis told you, for my wife and I, those previews are important, and we want to find out what we're going to see next. It's something we do often in retirement. And as you could see, Your Honor, The individuals that were in that theater were all retired just about. It's a large group of matinee movie watchers that are retired. They go there to the matinee specifically to have that quiet moment, to enjoy that experience in a movie theater. That theater is darkened. That theater is loud. And after 3 years of battling, and I mean battling with the production companies to try to get that experience for you again, we were lucky to get that accomplished. We wanted to show you that experience of sitting in seat number 9. We wanted to give you the experience of seeing the darkened theater. We wanted to give you the experience of understanding the noise level in that theater. We wanted to give you the experience of seeing just how close that 6'4", 200-pound Chad Olson was to Mr. Reeves. It is only by seating yourself in that chair and watching the bright lights come and go from that screen and listening to the thunder of those action-packed previews that you can understand the experience. Of course, when you're seated in that theater and you're watching the previews, that's where your focus is at. But your focus is distracted when you have a light shining in your face from a patron in front and to the right of you. And with respect, what is it that Curtis Reeves did that matinee afternoon? Did he sit back and say, "Hey fella, turn your phone off"? Or did he say, "Can you please turn your phone off"? Was there a reason that he leaned forward? Was that a common courtesy to others that were in that theater? Of course it was. And that very act tells you a great deal about who this gentleman right here is. The response? The F word starts flying. How many times, certainly in my 59 years on this earth, I go to the movies a lot, have we ever seen anyone use profanity in a theater? That would be shocking absolutely shocking to the best of us. Even to the ones that maybe understand people. You know, my biggest shock came in the opening statements of the prosecution this morning, or this few days ago, 2 weeks ago. I think it was a few days ago. I feel like it's a few days ago. But I remember Mr. Martin using a phrase that I almost fell out of my chair. Literally almost fell out of my chair. His phrase was, "That was non-consensual contact." Non-consensual contact? Is that where we're at today in this world? Is that really where we're at? That we can't lean forward and ask a fellow patron, a fellow moviegoer? They put the announcements up on the screen. Could you turn your phone off? Is that where we're at in America today? Do we have to wear a sign on our back to say, "You can contact me"? Do we have to wear one right here on our shoulder, or better yet, on our heart? Is that where we're at? Is that what we're supposed to do? Are we not supposed to go to the court reporter and extend a request or a pleasantry? Or should I look for a sign to make sure that it's okay for me to do that? That's not the world I live in. That's not the world I would want to live in. We're human beings. We should care about each other. We don't need permission to talk to each other. Of importance is going to be that 30-plus second lapse of time that happens after Curtis leans forward to make that simple request. 30-plus seconds. 30-plus seconds. +30 seconds. Curtis is here. Let's just time it. Starting now. Thirty seconds. Time for Mr. Olson to finish whatever he was finishing. Please turn down your phone. They're really asking a whole lot. And when he doesn't turn his phone off, he leans over one more time. Not, "Hey buddy, I told you to turn your phone off. Turn it off." But again, he's leaving no choice but to get manager. He does exactly that. He doesn't take that into his own hands. Curtis Reeves, the former retired law enforcement officer, doesn't take that matter into his own hands. He's not a police officer anymore. He's not a police officer anymore. The last 12 years of his life were in the corporate world, where situations just like that are handled by advising managers. A responsible, a procedural thing to do. Curtis gets up. Vivian just wants to move. No doubt. If anyone in this case knew what would have happened, everybody would have just moved. But unfortunately, we don't get to do those things over. I wish we could. I wish there was that magic wand. And Vivian says, let's just move. Curtis says, I'm going to go tell the manager. And if you remember, Miss Roy was just a seat away. Mumbling or telling me what? Then we're telling me. We'll talk about Miss Roy in a little bit because contamination, as the court well knows, is a very important part of this case. And a very tragic part of this case. So he hands the popcorn to his wife, tells her he's going to go tell the manager, and off he goes. The next segment of the evidence in this case is brutally critical. Why? Well, we know that we have a video both inside that captures, unfortunately, a very small part of the theater, but it also captures Mr. Reeves in a very important place at this theater, at the manager's desk. And yes, Mr. Peck, thank God he was there. We knew who he was. We knew who he was. And we knew what he said. Look, I was talking to a young lady there, finished talking to this young lady, and Mr. Reeves was there. There was really nothing about the communication that I had with him other than he was complaining about someone having the phone. I didn't think anything of it. I was going to take care of it, but it was nothing that was pressing. He was polite. He wasn't rude. He wasn't agitated. But we knew that there was going to be a problem with that. We knew that the government was going to say, well, they've got an interest in this case because Ms. Wilson's suing. They've got an interest in this case. They don't want to say that it was something that was exciting, because guess what? If they say that it was exciting, then we've got the basis for the civil lawsuit. They didn't act quickly enough. So we knew that there was going to be a problem. The bigger problem that we had was, who is that young lady? Can you have that photo, Madam Clerk? It's one of the photos of the introduced. Rupa, could you please help here? That young lady was so important to us. Law enforcement had interviewed her, but we didn't have her name, and we didn't have a report. That young lady that could care less about the Cobb Theater, could care less about Curtis Reeves, we wanted to try to find that lady. And Your Honor, by the grace of God, by the grace of God, we were able to find this young lady. Don Michelle Simpson. Don Michelle Simpson. Not on any discovery list, not on any police report, nowhere to be found. This young lady here came and testified before oath. I swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And she told you, I was there to get some posters for my children. And I saw Mr. Reeves. He was polite, there was no anxiety, there was nothing that I noticed of him unusual. He was making a request and someone was using the phone. Totally unrefuted. Totally unrefuted. But she spoke to some detective, she told you. Because she called 911. Remember her testimony, Your Honor? She called 911 to say, hey, listen, I just left this theater. Police officers are coming everywhere. Now I find out that this happened. Do you want to talk to me? She described Curtis Reeves as a polite, older man. Engaged in a practice that he had promoted himself at Bush Entertainment. If there's a problem in the park, go and get a manager. Let the manager take care of those issues. Curtis returns to his seat. This was very telling. According to Mr. Turner, who is very active in scanning the theater, he's always on high alert, and he tells you that when Curtis comes back into the theater, again, very polite, excuse me, sir, barreling through the aisle? No, Mr. Turner says. In fact, just the opposite. There's limited space there. And so he is scooting himself down the aisle. Your Honor was able to see the video in this case. Because fortunately, at times and many times, that video, that camera number 11, that so important camera number 11, captures him leaving while holding on to the wall for balance, and captures him coming back and scooting to his seat. And you have to ask yourself at that point in time, why do the witnesses differ on this? Remember when we talked about perception at the very beginning of my opening statements? Remember when we talked about perception at the beginning of my closing statements? Those perceptions can be influenced. Some perceptual influences are good. Some perceptual influences are horrific. By the grace of God, that young lady something that happens as Curtis is walking back that coincides with the evidence in this case. And that is, he notices Mr. Olson staring at him. And he tells him, you put your phone away. called management, and you put your phone away. That's not an antagonistic exchange. That's not a mean exchange. If anything, it's extending that kind of olive branch. Listen, I wouldn't have called management had I known where to put the phone. Does Curtis Reeves believe that management's coming soon? Of course he does. Does he want to have another problem with this gentleman as he's trying to watch a movie and enjoy the experience? Of course not. And how do we know? How do we know what Curtis Reeves' intention was at that moment? It's very telling. It's very telling. What does Curtis Reeves do before he sits down? Let's think about it. Curtis Reeves grabs that popcorn from his wife grabs that popcorn from his wife and sits down. You think any reasonable person that has any intent whatsoever to engage in any type of verbal or physical confrontation is going to be grabbing a bag of popcorn and sit down in a chair? Now we're at my hour break.
Okay.
We'll resume.
All right, let's take a 1-minute recess.
All rise.